After 4 draws, Bronstein finally won a victory in Game 5. Botvinnik sought for 52 minutes on his 11th move and got in time trouble later in the game. Although he had a slight advantage, due to the lack of time he made a couple of mistakes, which were very well exploited by Bronstein. The game is also notable for Bronstein's great silent move, which he considered to be one of his best in the whole match. Botvinnik started with d4, and Bronstein played nimzo-indian defense this time. Knight c3, bishop b4, e3, castle kingside, bishop d3, c5, immediately attacking the center, knight f3, b6, preparing the fianchetto of the bishop, castle kingside, bishop b7, knight a4. This is a strong move. White is threatening to play a3, and now that the knight has moved from c3, the bishop of course cannot exchange on c3 and would be forced after a3 to move to a5, which isn't a very good square for it. And also after it, white is threatening to capture twice on c5 and win a pawn, because knight a4 also is attacking c5. That's why c takes d, opening the retreat diagonal for the bishop, and after a3, bishop e7, e takes d, queen c7. And here Botvinnik sought for 52 minutes and played a strong move, b4. Bronstein in his annotations writes that probably Botvinnik was trying to choose between b4 and h3, which would prevent knight g4. And as Botvinnik hasn't prevented knight g4, of course, after b4, Bronstein played knight g4, creating immediate threats. So both the knight and queen are attacking h2, the only defender is the knight on f3, so black is threatening to eliminate the defender with tempo and then just checkmate on h2. That's why g3. And after that, f5. So black is going to play on the king side. Black is going to play f4, open the f file, exert very strong pressure on f file. The bishop is directed towards the king side, the queen, the knight is on the king side, so black is going to play on the king side, while white is going to play on the queen side and the center. White is going to play c5 and is going to squeeze black on the queen side, and also d5, playing in the center. Knight c3, knight wasn't doing anything on a4 anymore, and from c3 it would support d5, and also there are some unpleasant knight b5 threats with tempo. a6, preventing knight b5, rook e1, knight c6, developing, bishop f1. So bishop is rerouted to g2 in order to defend the weakened light squares and to decrease b7 bishop's strong pressure. Knight d8, opening the bishop's diagonal, and the knight is rerouted to f7 in order to exert some pressure. Bishop f4 attacking the queen, bishop d6, exchange of bishops, bishop g2, knight f7, c5, queen c7, and here Botvinnik made a weak move. He played rook c1. In the dynamic positions like this, this move, rook c1, can be considered a loss of tempo. Instead of it, it would be better to play more actively. Knight a4. As a6 weakened b6 square, knight a4 is attacking b6. So white is threatening to capture. That's why, for example, if b5, then knight b6 with tempo attacking the rook. And after rook e8, d5. So black still hasn't played f4, while white pawns are already on c5 and d5, and white would have initiative and advantage in this position. However, Botvinnik played passively rook c1, and now rook e8. And after knight a4, b5, if white plays knight b6, it would come without tempo, because rook isn't on a8 anymore. And Bronstein was planning to play d5 in this position, in order to prevent white from playing d5. So that's why after b5, Botvinnik didn't play knight b6 and played knight c3, in order to support d5. And now f4. So white still hasn't played d5, while black already played f4. d5 now, and f takes g. And here Botvinnik makes a serious mistake. Instead of more natural h takes g, he captured with f pawn. Bronstein writes that perhaps he captured with f pawn as black knight and rook are attacking f2. And by capturing with f pawn, he just removed the object of attack of these pieces. Now, there is no object of attack on f2. However, this move, f takes g, has a serious drawback. It seriously weakens e3 square, and you will see how important it will be later in the game. E takes d, and here Botvinnik didn't capture on d5. Probably because after knight takes d5, black could have just exchanged on d5 and play knight e3, as the e3 square is weakened, attacking the queen and the bishop. And after queen d2, exchange on g2, exchange of rooks, and d6, getting rid of the main weakness, backward isolated pawn on d7, and exchanging it for very strong c5 pawn, after which the position would be equal. That's why Botvinnik played queen d4. As the pawn on d5 is doomed anyways, he just decided to exert more pressure and to capture the pawn later. Bronstein in his annotations writes that this move, this avoidance of capture on d5, of immediate capture on d5, might have had also psychological explanation, as Botvinnik took pleasure of playing against these isolated, doubled, weak pawns, and he wanted to prolong the torture. So it makes perfect sense. Queen d4 is also attacking the knight. Knight f6, and now we can see Botvinnik's idea, knight h4. So the knight is rerouted to f5, where it would be very active, and it would be able also later jump on d6 on a great post. Rook e5. This leads to mass exchanges on e5 after rook takes, queen takes, queen takes, knight f5, knight c4, and here Botvinnik made a serious mistake. He had his last chance to capture on d5. At first sight it's impossible because black protects d5 twice and white is attacking twice. However, there is a tactical opportunity. White could have captured on d5, and after exchanges on d5 there is a fork, knight e7, check, and after king moves, knight takes d5. Botvinnik didn't want this position, probably because it's more or less equal. Although white has actually some advantage here, white is better because the pawn is backward, and actually it wouldn't be so easy for black to defend this position because the knight is very active, the rook on f8 is passive, so white has some small advantage. However, Botvinnik wanted more, and Bronstein writes in his annotations that Botvinnik wanted from the position more than it could offer. He played rook d1, again postponing the capture of d5, and he wanted to capture it under better circumstances. After mass exchanges on d5, he eventually wanted to capture with a rook. So the rook on c1 wasn't doing anything, and on d5 it would be placed very well, very actively, attacking black's main weakness on d7, and if d7 falls, then c5 pawn would turn into a passed pawn. So that was Botvinnik's idea. However, with his next great move, which Bronstein considers one of his best moves in the whole match, Bronstein prevents white from capturing this pawn, and the pawn on d5 becomes untouchable. You can pause the video and try to find Bronstein's great move. So this is prophylactic move, king h8. Now, after all these exchanges on d5, knight e7 wouldn't be fork anymore, wouldn't be check anymore. And it turns out that white cannot capture the pawn. If knight takes d5, then after exchanges on d5 and rook takes d5, g6, and it turns out that the knight cannot move. If knight moves, then knight e3 would be deadly, attacking the rook, and on the other hand, threatening checkmate. And the rook cannot defend the back rank because knight also controls d1 square, and black is winning on the spot in this case. So after g6 in this variation, white would be forced to capture the pawn, hoping to promote the pawn. However, it doesn't work. After g takes f, c6, knight e5, attacking the rook, rook c7, rook f7, check, king g7, c7, threatening to check and promote. However, king f6. Now there are no checks. The rook cannot move because the pawn would fall. White can only move the king. However, knight c6 and knight a7, attacking the rook. And after rook moves, then the rook captures the pawn and defends the knight. That's why in this position Botvinnik played rook e1. So now knight takes a3, Knight d6 attacking the bishop, bishop c6. Now the pawn is unguarded, that's why rook a1, knight c2, rook takes a6, and d4. So this pawn, which could have been taken so many times, which was doomed, this weakest, black's main weakness, has turned into the main strength, and now this pawn is a very dangerous passed pawn. Knight takes b5, bishop takes g2, eliminating the only defender of the king, and it turns out that the king is in danger now. Knight g4, threatening rook f2 check. That's why knight f5, blocking the f-file. Of course, black cannot capture because of back rank checkmate. But now d3, the pawn is moving further, threatening just to promote. That's why rook d6, taking it under control. But now there is no back rank issues, so rook takes f5. And after rook takes d3, knight e3 check. And it turns out that white king is just checkmated next move. That's why Botvinnik in this position resigned. Hit the like button, as it's really helpful for the channel growth, and subscribe to watch next videos of this next games of this great match. See you in the analysis of game 6.